They told us never to meet alone. Not with an asset, not with a target, and definitely not with a ghost from your own agency. But some rules were never made for the field. They were made for the clean desks back home. It was a Tuesday, or maybe a Thursday. Hard to say now, but I remember the light. Harsh, cold, and gray, like Berlin's own version of a hangover. The kind that settles into your bones. I was carrying a Browning in my coat and a question I couldn't say out loud. He'd asked for the meeting, not in code. Just a name, Café, and a date written on the back of an East German cigarette card. No signature, just his handwriting. That was enough. You wouldn't believe me if I told you who showed up. Don't expect you to believe what came after either. Maybe I wasn't supposed to. Maybe I wasn't even supposed to survive it. But I did. And if I'm talking now, it's not because I'm looking for absolution. It's because someone out there still thinks this never happened. Before I regret saying any of this, hit that like button, subscribe if this is already making you uncomfortable, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from and what time it is. I like knowing where in the world people still dare to listen to secrets like these. It wasn't even on the map. Café had no sign, no posted hours, and no regulars, just chipped porcelain cups, a cracked radio that only played static, and a waitress who didn't speak unless spoken to in Polish. I arrived 5 minutes early, always 5. Never on the hour, never exactly late. Just enough to know if someone was already watching the place. The smell hit first burnt sugar and cheap tobacco, the kind of smell that settles in your coat and stays there for weeks. I chose a table facing the window, back to the wall. From there, I could see the alley, the tram, and the 3 exit points I'd memorized before walking in. That wasn't paranoia. That was training. They told me he was dead. The official line was defection and disappearance, then presumed executed. But someone wanted me to think otherwise, and they knew how to get my attention. No stamp, no seal, just a handwritten note on an old photo of Checkpoint Charlie. Café Silesia, noon, come alone. That was all it said, but it was his handwriting. I knew it like I knew my own. I didn't know if he was going to recruit me or kill me. He walked in like he owned the place. No disguise, no urgency. Same coat, same limp, same impossible calm. He paused just long enough to make eye contact, not recognition, not apology, just a flicker like he was taking inventory. He ordered coffee in Polish, sat down without asking, lit a cigarette. Then he said my name like it still belonged to me. You look older, he said, but not smarter. I didn't respond. Not yet. Not until I knew how this would go. His fingers tapped a rhythm on the table. 3 beats, pause. 2 beats, pause. Old signal, Langley training. Used to mean safe to speak. I didn't believe it then, and I don't believe it now. Kept my hand near the Browning, just in case. Then he laughed, low and bitter. Relax. If I wanted you dead, you'd be on the floor already. You know that. He wasn't wrong. He pulled a paper napkin from the dispenser and started writing. No questions, no pleasantries. Just numbers, coordinates, names, all in shorthand. Then he slid it across the table like we were just trading stock tips. I didn't touch it. You're here because someone wants me gone, he said. But I'm not the one you should be worried about. That's when I noticed the sweat, not his, mine. Behind my collar, down my back. Berlin was cold that week, but I was burning, not from fear, from the realization that I didn't know the rules of this game anymore. He leaned in. His voice dropped to a whisper. They turned on you, he said. They already have. I wanted to laugh, call his bluff, pull the gun and end it there. But something in his eyes wasn't lying. I glanced down at the napkin again. One of the names was still active. One was dead, and one was mine. I stood up too fast. My chair scraped against the tile, a sound too loud for a place like this. The waitress looked up for the first time. He didn't flinch. "Take it," he said. "Or don't. Either way, you're already in it." I grabbed the napkin and walked out, never turning my back fully to him. Out on the street, I didn't breathe until I crossed into the Western Zone. Even then, it didn't help much. I'd come for answers. I left with a question that still wakes me up at 3 a.m. Why me? And that was just the beginning. The napkin sat folded in my coat pocket like a fuse I was too scared to light. I didn't look at it again until I was back in the safe flat, a 2-room rental above a tailor's shop on the western side. The walls were thin, the landlord was deaf, and the radio only picked up East German broadcasts. It was the kind of place no one would check twice. I spread the napkin on the table under the desk lamp. The handwriting was unmistakable, tight, angular, impatient, but something else caught my eye. On the back of the napkin, right near the crease, he'd written my name. Not the alias, not the code name. My real one. The one I hadn't heard out loud since Langley. Underneath it, a single word. Remember. I should have left it there. Burned it. But ID, single quotes T. The next morning, I went back. Same cafe. Same waitress. Same empty window seat. Only this time, he wasn't there. I almost turned around, but then I saw it on the table, tucked inside the metal napkin holder where the sugar packets usually went. A folded note. My name written on the outside in the same rushed hand. But it wasn't the seat writing that stopped me. It was the fact that he'd used my nickname. The one only a handful of people knew. The one he mocked me with during training, back when none of us knew how deep the rot really went. I opened the note with the tips of my fingers, like it might be rigged to explode. Inside, one line. You're already being followed. Table behind you. Don't turn. I didn't move. I didn't blink. I just stared at the note like it might start bleeding. He was watching me either in person or through someone else. And if that was true, it meant he wasn't alone. The waitress walked by and for the first time said something in German. "Would you like something sweet with your coffee today?" She looked tired. Too tired for this game. I nodded once. She placed a cinnamon roll in front of me. I hadn't ordered it. That's when I knew. This wasn't just about me. I took out a pen from my coat, flipped the napkin, and started writing what I remembered from the names and numbers he gave me the day before. I did it from memory. Couldn't risk having the original on me. But as I was scribbling down the list, something strange hit me. His handwriting. It had changed. Slightly. The angles were the same, but the pressure lighter, the loops off center. My hand froze mid-word. What if it wasn't him writing the second note? What if someone else had access to our signals? I took the serviette with me and walked out calmly. No sudden moves. Just a man who'd had too much coffee and too little sleep. Back at the flat, I dug out an old training file. Inside was a sample from his personnel record, his actual handwriting. I laid it next to the note from the CAFE acute. Close. Too close. But not identical. I remembered something he once told me in Vienna, years before everything turned to ash. If they ever tried to copy me, he said, they'll forget the flourish on the R. That's how you'll know. I checked the air and remember. No flourish. That note wasn't from him, and whoever wrote it knew my name, my nickname, and where I'd be sitting. That was when it hit me. I wasn't the only one being watched. He was being watched too. And if someone was intercepting our communication, someone inside, then this wasn't a game anymore. It was a purge, and I'd already been marked. You don't forget the sound of Langley's doors. They don't slam, they seal like something important just got locked away for good. Most people think our real training happened in the field. That's bullshit. The field just tests what Langley already put inside you. After the second meeting, if I can even call it, that I stayed off the streets for 3 days. No contact, no reports. Just me, that napkin, and the gnawing certainty that someone on our side was playing both. Ends. So I did what any ghost would do. I went back. Not physically, of course, but in my head, I walked those sterile hallways again. I sat in those beige-walled briefing rooms, listened to those dead-eyed instructors telling us how to spot a liar, how to build one, how to become one. I could almost hear Agent Calhoun's voice in my ear again. Trust the intel, not the intuition. He was wrong, because the moment I stopped trusting my gut, I let someone else write the narrative. And now, whoever that was, they were writing it in my name. I pulled out my old notebook. The real one. Not the issued kind. This one was leather-bound, water-damaged, held together with a rubber band and paranoia. Inside were names, signals, fragment stuff that never made it into any file. Buried in the middle was a code, a 18-Wolf-T3. It took me back instantly. Third training cycle. Cold read drills. I was paired with someone everyone thought was a liability sharp, erratic, arrogant as hell. The same man who met me in Café Silesia. He used to hum Beethoven under his breath while dissecting reports. Used to say things like, "The facts are useful, but the silence between them tells the real story." Back then, I thought it was just his ego talking. Now I wasn't so sure. I reread his personnel file that night. Not the redacted one. The original copy I'd borrowed years ago, when I still believed I'd need leverage someday. That leverage had now become a warning. He knew about Operation Wren. He wasn't supposed to. And if he knew that, he knew about the list. List we all denied existed. I remember the day I first saw it folded into a file marked Training Failures. It wasn't official. No signature. Just initials, names, aliases, and 3 color codes. Green, cleared. Yellow, monitored. Red. Potentially compromised. I was yellow. He was green. At least back then. I remember asking Calhoun once what monitored actually meant. He just smiled and said, "Means you're interesting enough to keep alive." That line made more sense now than it ever had. I stared at my wall, trying to rebuild the tree of connections from memory. Names, dates, shifts in handler protocols, anything. That didn't line up. But my thoughts kept circling back to that napkin and the missing flourish on the R. Because if someone inside was using his signals to reach me, it meant one of two things. Either he'd been flipped, or he was being used just like I was. And the worst part, I couldn't even tell which scenario scared me more. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Langley's walls again. That sterile light. Those blank-eyed analysts. Those perfect reports with no trace of blood, betrayal, or broken minds. They trained us to forget certain things, but some things refused to stay buried. And what came next would rip the whole damn file drawer open. I found him again in the rain. Same cafe. Different table. This time, he wasn't waiting for me. I spotted him through the fogged window, hunched over. A newspaper that hadn't been printed in years. It was a message. Everything he did was a message. But I was starting to think the messages weren't just for me. I walked in slow. No gun this time. No note. Just questions. And a gut full of dread. He looked up and smiled like we were old friends who'd lost touch over something petty. Divorce, maybe. Not treason. You burned the napkin, he said, without asking. I didn't answer. He folded the paper in half, then in quarters. Placed it between us. They're cleaning house, he said. It's already started. I asked him what he meant. Sighed. Langley's burning anyone west of Prague with even a trace of red ink in their training record. I asked how he knew. He looked at me like I was slow. Because I used to write those records, he said. And because someone is rewriting them now. That's when he told me what he wanted. Not money, not protection, not even forgiveness. Just one thing. To listen. He had information, he said. A full list of compromised agents. Not the outdated scraps from Vienna, or the double-blind psyops we fed each other in Budapest. A real list, alive, in motion, in play. He said he could stop what was coming, but only if I stayed, heard him out, and didn't try to save myself. That was the catch. If I ran the list up the chain, it would trigger a protocol that would wipe out our own people. Not sleepers, not moles, assets, men and women who didn't even know they were being watched. Collateral damage under a new directive. They won't purge the enemies, he said. They'll purge the inconvenient. I wanted to call bullshit. Wanted to. Throw it back in his face and walk. But I didn't. Because as he said it, I remembered something. A report from Vienna months ago. A handler named Voss. Disappeared. No inquiry. No funeral. A line in his file. Transferred to internal review. Which meant one thing. Neutralized. He pushed the folded paper toward me. There's a name in there, he said. You'll recognize it. I unfolded it. Only 3 words were typed. Operative, a 18-volt T3. I froze. That was my code. I looked. At him. Why? I asked. Why help me? He lit a cigarette. Took his time answering. Because they promised me silence, he said. And I'm tired of being silent. There was something else in his voice that time. Not bitterness. Not smugness. Regret. He told me there was a way to stop the purge, but only if I agreed to cut contact with command. Operate independently. Verify the list piece by piece. Stay under the radar until we had enough to expose the rot without triggering. It wasn't a mission. It was a death sentence with a deadline. You'll be alone, he said. And they'll make sure no one believes you when it's over. I told him I'd think about it. He laughed again. You already said yes. You just haven't admitted it yet. Then he dropped his cigarette into the last sip of his coffee and walked out into the rain. Left me there with 3 words, 1 promise, and the creeping sense that none of this would ever make it into any official record. And maybe that was the point, because the truth wasn't designed to survive. It was wrapped in wax paper, yellowed, folded 4 times, tucked inside the lining of a leather glove. He handed it to me like it was nothing, like he wasn't about to append everything I thought I knew. We weren't. At Café Silesia this time, too visible now. We met in the back of a shuttered cinema, just off Kantstrasse. The marquee still advertised a Western from 2 years ago. No one went inside anymore. No one wanted to. I didn't speak when I saw him. I just nodded. He reached into his coat and pulled out the glove. Laid it gently on the velvet seat between us. I found this 2 days ago, he said. At a safe house that shouldn't exist. I opened the glove slowly, like it might be booby-trapped. Inside was a Soviet officer's pocket watch. Brass casing, star insignia. A kind issued to internal political enforcers, not field agents. On the back, initials scratched out crudely. And under the hinge, barely visible in the crease of the casing blood. Not fresh, but unmistakable. I turned it over in my hand and froze. There was a dent on the crown. A deep, specific dent, because I'd seen that same dent before and Langley in 1959 in a file labeled K-Icarus. A file that should have been destroyed. Where did you find it? I asked. He didn't blink. on the floor next to a dead man with a false passport. The passport had your face on it. I stared at him. That wasn't me, I said. He nodded. I know. That silence between us wasn't tactical. It was personal, because this wasn't just some disavowed asset showing me a relic. This was a message. Someone had replicated my identity, created a trail, and left a corpse in my name. The body would get found, eventually, and when it did, Langley would close the file. I'd be dead. On paper, expendable in reality. He leaned in. They started the burn, he said. This proves it. I wanted to smash the damn watch on the floor. Instead, I held it in my palm and tried to breathe through the static flooding my skull. The dent. How could they've known? Only 3 people saw that file with me. One of them was Calhoun. One was declared missing in Warsaw. And the third was now sitting next to me. I turned to him, voice low. Tell me it wasn't you. He didn't look away. It wasn't, but I knew it would come back. That's when I realized the real game wasn't about trust. It was about how much betrayal you could live with. He stood up, placed his glove back on, and started walking toward the exit. Before the door creaked shut, he looked back once. There's a number inside the casing, he said. Use a match. It'll show under the soot. Then he disappeared into the dark, like he'd never been there. I waited 10 minutes. Then I struck a match, and inside the casing, faint but deliberate, was a string of 6 digits. Coordinates. Balkan sector. A location I knew too well. A place we buried files and people. And one I swore I'd never return to. But if that watch really came from there, if the blood on it was real, then someone had reopened the past just to bury me with it. The number led me to Gellertstrasse, East Berlin, Soviet sector. I hadn't crossed that line in almost a year. Not since the mess in Jena, when we left a whole network to rot just to protect one name we weren't even allowed to speak. But I went anyway, not through a checkpoint. That would have been suicide. I used an old tunnel route built during the construction of Line U5, long before the wall. The bricks were loose. The air tasted like rust and secrets. It came out behind a bombed-out bookshop. No one noticed me. No one ever looked too long in the east. I moved like a shadow, keeping to the alleys until I saw it. A pension. 3 stories, roof slanted, windows fogged by age or intention. The kind of place you pay in cash and leave no name. I'd stayed there. Once, back in '60, surveillance op. The room had smelled like old cabbage and bleach. Now, it looked like it hadn't aged a day. Like it was waiting for me. I waited across the street, behind a bus shelter where the timetable had been ripped out. And then I saw him. Not the man from Café. Someone else. Someone I'd never expected to see outside of Langley. Gray coat. Slight limp. A scar behind his ear barely visible, but I'd memorized it years ago during our joint operations briefing. Benjamin, Laird. Analyst. Non-field. The kind of man who only traveled when there was something worth burying. He looked up at the pension, glanced around, slow but mechanical, then entered without knocking. I stayed frozen, because if Laird was here, either he'd gone rogue, or someone had sent him ahead of me. I waited 12 minutes, then crossed the street, entered the pension, through the rear service door. No lock, just quiet. Inside, it smelled the same. I took the staircase up, floor by floor. Each step creaked like a warning. 3rd floor. End of the hall. Room 309. Same room number from my op in '60. I pressed my ear to the door. Nothing. I knocked once sharp. Coded. No answer. I pulled out a flat blade from my coat lining and worked the lock. 30 seconds. The door gave. The room was empty. No Laird. No signs of struggle. But on the bed, Folded like a gift was the same newspaper the man from the cafe had used, dated 2 years prior. Same creases. Same ink smear across the masthead. I stepped in slowly, and then I noticed the window was cracked open. A faint draft. I moved to close it reflex. That's when I saw the note, wedged between the glass and the sill. My code again. A 18 Wolf T3. Beneath it, a line I hadn't seen since training. Observer compromised. Fall back to neutral. That wasn't for me. That was about me. I spun back to the room. Someone had been watching from here, and someone knew I was coming. The message wasn't a warning. It was a verdict, and I was already past the point of escape. I didn't run. I just stood there, breathing shallow, surrounded by dust, fake silence, and the growing certainty that Laird never came for surveillance. He came to erase something, or someone, and maybe, just maybe, he'd already done it, because what I found in the trash bin before I left was small, half-burned, but unmistakable. A photo. My photo, stained with blood and singed at the edges. There are two kinds of documents in our world: the ones they file and the ones they forget to destroy. The copy I found wasn't in a safe. It wasn't even hidden. It was misfiled intentionally, maybe stuffed in a drawer labeled personnel, transfers, 1956 to 1960, in our field office in Charlottenburg. That drawer hadn't been opened in years. Nobody wanted to touch the files from that era. Too many names that disappeared. Too many loose ends they called solved. I went in under the pretense of updating an asset profile. Badge still worked. Security nodded me through like I hadn't been flagged, like I still belonged. Maybe that was part of the game. The file was unmarked. No red tape, no stamps. Just a faded manila folder, bent at the corners. Inside, 17 pages typed on Anne. Olympia SM2. No official header. But I knew the layout. I'd written reports in that format before. Back when we were told paper could still be burned and secrets could still be buried. The title page just said, "O Directive. Internal review targets." I flipped through the pages. Aliases, movements, surveillance summaries. Not just Soviets. Ours. Western names. Western agents. I kept reading past handlers I knew, past analysts I trusted. And then I saw it. Page 11. Code. A 18 Wolf T3. That was me. There was no doubt. Assigned status, inactive pending sanitation. And next to that, handwritten in red pencil, monitor until signal. If exposed, neutralize quietly. Archive with non-flagged asset reports. I couldn't move. I couldn't even feel my hands. The room felt smaller, like the ceiling was collapsing. In slow motion, there was a date under that note. 10 days ago. That meant someone had already activated the process. That meant the trail of fake sightings. The body with my passport, the dented watch. It wasn't a warning. It was a prelude. I checked the last few pages. Field photographs, grainy. Surveillance stills of me, not recent. Some from Vienna, some from Warsaw. One from outside my flat, in Berlin. All taken from angles I hadn't noticed. From distances I thought were safe. One showed me at Café Silesia, alone. Which meant the person I met never appeared on camera. His seat was empty. His shadow gone. I closed the folder slowly. Carefully. Like I was folding a version of my own obituary. And then I did something I hadn't done in years. I took out my lighter, lit the edge of the folder, page by page, and let it burn in the ashtray. Not because I didn't want them to find it, because I knew they had copies, because destroying it wasn't about safety. It was about saying, finally, that I understood the message. They weren't watching me anymore. They were waiting for me to become the liability they needed me to be. And the only thing I didn't know was who would give the signal. I returned to Café Silesia one last time. It was raining again, hard, bitter, metallic rain that sounded like static on the roof. The kind that washes the color out of the streets and makes everything feel like the end of something. I didn't carry a weapon, didn't bring notes, didn't wear a coat that could hide anything. I just came as I was. When I walked in, he was already seated. Same table, same posture. This time, no paper, no props. Just a half-drunk cup of coffee and a blank expression that told me. Even he was tired of all this. We didn't speak for a while. Then he broke the silence. You saw the file. I didn't ask how he knew. He tapped twice on the table. No rhythm. Just contact. I told you, he said. You were never the target. You were the mirror. That line didn't make sense until it did, because what he meant was that I wasn't chosen to be erased for what I'd done. I was chosen for what I might reflect, the contradiction, the flaw in the system. He slid a matchbox across the table. Inside, folded tightly, was a strip of film negatives. I didn't open it. He said, proof of what they did in Riga, of who signed off. He was giving me an out or bait. Sometimes it was hard to tell the difference. I'm not looking to bring it down, I told him. He shook his head. Not down, just to light a corner. Enough for someone else to see the rot. That's when he made the proposal. We worked together, not as partners. Not even as allies. As leverage. He'd supply the names, the patterns, the movement. I'd verify, cross-check, confirm. We wouldn't contact Langley. Not directly. We'd build a list. One, so detailed it couldn't be ignored. But there was a condition. One name, just one I couldn't touch. He wrote it down on a napkin, just like the first time. Folded it twice. I didn't open it. Not yet. Why? I asked. He looked away for the first time. Because I owe her. And because you once did too. I knew instantly who it was. And I knew what it meant. Protecting her meant burying part of the truth. Meant leaving a fracture in the story we were about to assemble. I told him I couldn't promise that. He said, you already did. Years ago. You just forgot. The waitress brought the check. No one asked for it. I paid in coins, left the change. He took the matchbox and slid it into my coat pocket without me noticing. And before he stood up, he said, if you ever need to. Abort? Say the word. What word? He smiled faintly, almost like a joke. Zimschneck. Cinnamon roll. Of course, it was. The thing they always brought with my coffee. The thing I never ordered. The thing that had been watching me since day one. He left without shaking my hand. And I sat there, napkin in one hand, film in the other, wondering, not whether to trust him, but whether I was already too compromised to matter. I didn't use the word. Not once. But after that night, every time I saw it on a menu, behind the counter, or folded on a plate I didn't ask for, it felt like a trigger wired straight to my spine. ZIMTSCHNECKE. Cinnamon roll. The most innocent thing in Berlin. And now, the quiet signal that everything had gone to hell. I carried the napkin with her name on it in my wallet for 5 days. I didn't open it. I told myself I wouldn't, that maybe by not reading it, I could keep the illusion that the pact was still optional. But even lies lose their power when repeated too often. On the 6th day, I cracked. It was her. Irena Vollmer. Last seen in Prague, 1958. Disappeared after a black bag op we weren't supposed to remember. Everyone thought she was burned or defected. But I knew better. I knew because we'd shared more than intel. And now, keeping her name off the list meant leaving a hole big enough to bury 10 good men. But I didn't scratch it off. Not yet. Instead, I started testing the system. I fed a name to our side. A small one. Harmless. an ex-asset in Kassel who hadn't been active since the Hungarian crisis. 3 days later, he turned up dead in a canal outside Dusseldorf. Throat slit, no wallet, no press. That wasn't a coincidence. That was a message. The next day, I got my own dot. It came in the form of a breakfast tray, delivered to my flat by a boy no older than 12. He didn't speak, just smiled, handed me the tray, and left. On the plate, coffee and a cinnamon roll wrapped in wax paper. Inside the roll, wedged so deep I almost missed it, was a torn piece of photographic film. Negative. One frame it showed a blurred figure standing in front of the U-Bahn entrance at Zoologischer Garten. Long coat, umbrella, head tilted slightly down. It was me, taken that morning, which meant they were closer than I thought. I called the contact line, the one we set up with 4 layers of MISDI, RECTI, ON. No answer. Not a click, not even static. That line was already dead. So I waited. 6 hours later, I received a coded transmission via teletype, routed through a cutout office we hadn't used in years. The entire message was just 4 words. Confirm pastry. Confirm silence. I didn't respond. Not because I was brave, because I didn't know who I'd be responding to anymore. That night, I wrote down every name from memory. The whole list. Cross-dash referenced it with the notes he'd given me. 3 names appeared on both. 1 was the ex-asset from Kassel. 1 was my own. And the third was still active in Bonn. Someone was using us as bait. Someone wanted to flesh out the full web. But the question that kept gnawing at me, louder than any protocol, clearer than any code, was, had he already used the word? Had he whispered Zimschneck to someone else, somewhere else, to save his own skin? Because if he had, I'd be the next name folded into the wax paper. I still had the old receiver, a battered Soviet unit we confiscated back in '59 during the crossover with Hungarian dissidents. It picked up shortwave, Morse, and static, mostly static. I kept it out of sentiment, or maybe superstition. That night, I turned it on, not out of instinct, out of desperation. The flat was silent, too silent. No trams, no neighbors, no music bleeding through walls. Just me, the receiver, and the ache. Behind my eyes, I scanned slowly, frequencies bleeding into one, another like whispers from a ruined church. Then I heard it, 3 long beeps. 2 short. Pause. Then again. It wasn't random. It was coded. A variant key. Agency protocol. I wrote it down, pulse spiking. The message looped 4 times before dissolving into white noise. I translated it in pieces, cross-referencing old ciphers. From operations we were never supposed to log, the final line froze me cold. Wolf T3 compromised. Observed breach. Awaiting correction. It was a death sentence, wrapped in code, broadcast in the clear, and it wasn't coming from the east. It originated from Bonn. Our side. That changed everything. I double-checked the coordinates. The signal was bounced off a repeater we'd used only once, during Operation False Ember. Only 4 people knew that frequency. One of them was me. 1 was already dead. 1 had disappeared 2 years ago. And the last was the same man who passed me the napkin. I wanted to believe he hadn't done it, but part of me wondered if this was the plan all along. Not to expose the rot, but to test the immunity of the infection. I disconnected the receiver, pulled the antenna free, wrapped it in foil. Habit. Then I went back to the table, spread out the negatives, the notes, the photos. I needed to build a new map, a new way through. But the loop kept playing in my head. Wolf T3 compromised, awaiting correction. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. I paced the flat until dawn. And when the sun broke through the curtains like a prison searchlight, I made the call. Not to Langley. Not to him, to her, to Irena. The line didn't ring out, it clicked once. Then silence. Then softly static. Then a voice hers. I told you, she said. They'd never let you finish it. And the line went dead. I sat there for a long time, not wondering how she answered. But who she was talking to before I called. Because that voice, it wasn't a recording, it was live, and if she was still in the game, I wasn't just compromised, I was already in checkmate. I never should have had access to the archive. But access in our world is never about permission. It's about leverage. And I had just enough left to bluff my way into the document vault beneath our diplomatic annex in Dahlem. Coded key. False clearance. The clerk never even looked up from his sandwich. I asked for the Vollmer transfer. File a dead-end record. I knew they wouldn't question. But once inside, I searched for something else. R-451-D. The red band files. Sealed under a directive that didn't officially exist. I found it, tucked between two outdated embassy briefings. No barcode. No signature. Just a hand-tied band of crimson string, frayed at the edges like it had been opened before many times. Inside, 39 pages, 7 photos, and 1 cassette tape. Subject: Robert E. Marshall. Status: Deserter. Presunto Traidor. Except he wasn't. 2 destroyed everything I thought I knew. He was never declared rogue, never disappeared. He was assigned, sanctioned under internal directive mirror cell. Objective: embedded loyalty stressor. Tasked with long-term observation of Wolf T3. Maintain relational proximity. Influence outcome. I read it twice, then a third time. He wasn't watching the enemy. He was watching me. Every meeting, every whisper, every doubt I'd confessed to him in safe houses, alleys, train platforms, they were all part of his report. All by design. But what burned the most wasn't the betrayal. It was the date on the activation. Order: February 12, 1959. 2 years before I was even fully cleared for Berlin. Which meant someone at Langley had doubts about me before I ever arrived. Before I ever made a choice. I flipped to the last page. Evaluation summary. Wolf T3 demonstrates high resilience to ideological compromise. However, displays recurring tendencies toward unsanctioned empathy and personal attachments. Subject may pose systemic risk in the event of internal cleansing. Systemic risk. That was my legacy. Courage, not sacrifice. Risk. I pulled out the cassette. No label. I slipped it into the player on the corner desk. Pressed play. Silence. Then hiss. Then a voice, his Marshall's. Calm, methodical, like a man reading weather. Data. Subject responded to disinformation as expected. Displayed protective instincts toward IV, consistent with prior cycles. Recommends further destabilization before final trigger. I paused the tape. I.V. Irena Vollmer, even her presence in this mess, had been part of the control grid. There was no coincidence. No redemption. Just patterns. Scripts. Roles. And I'd played mine without knowing. I looked at the mirror on the far wall. Gold, cracked at the corner. For a moment, I wasn't sure if I was looking at myself or the version they'd written into existence. Because if he was just a character in my script, maybe I was one in his. And the worst part? I couldn't tell who the real author was anymore. I make coffee every morning. Same routine. Same chipped porcelain cup from the old quarter. Bought it from a street vendor after the wall came down. Said it was East German, but I think he just liked the story behind. The cracks. I always place the cup gently on the saucer, never with noise, as if sound might wake something that's better left sleeping. That morning, I poured the coffee like usual. No sugar, No cream dot, and I heard it. A faint click, porcelain against porcelain. Too deliberate. Too measured dot. It wasn't just a sound dot, it was a memory dot, or maybe a signal. Café Silesia. That final conversation. The way he stirred his cup, counterclockwise. The way the spoon hit the edge exactly 3 times before he stopped. Dot. It was Morse. I didn't see it then, but now. I replayed that rhythm on my kitchen table. 3 taps. Pause. 2 taps. Dot. Same as the first time. Dot. Same as the old. Langley signal for burn notice active. He told me he was trying to save me, but he was warning me all along, and I missed it, or chose not to see it. Sit in silence now. Not because I'm hiding, because I don't know what I am outside of what they made me. Sometimes I wonder if they left me alive on purpose, not out of mercy, not out of loyalty, out of habit. Dot. To see how long a ghost would keep playing the part. And every time I lift that cup to my lips, I hear it again. That quiet click, the unfinished sentence, the moment just before everything broke, and I still don't know if I was the traitor or just the final test of loyalty. Sierra final. 150 palabras. They never came for me. Dot. No knock at the door. No shadow in the alley. No bullet wrapped in silence. Dot. Just time. Dot. And silence. Dot. And the rituals I repeat. To feel real boiling water, folded napkins, locked drawers I never open. I no longer check the windows. They already saw what they needed. Sometimes I think I outlived the people who wanted me gone. Other times, I think I just stopped being interesting. Dot. There are nights when I wake up and expect to hear static again, clipped Morse bouncing off the walls. But there's nothing left to decode. Only questions that rot, slower than truth, like whether Irina was ever real, or whether I ever was. If you're hearing this, it means someone opened the drawer I swore I'd never lock. Maybe that's enough. Maybe not. Dot. But if you're still listening, then someone out there remembers the sound of broken porcelain too. If this story left you with more questions than answers, subscribe and tell me in the comments what you knew about this side of Berlin. Sometimes secrets need someone else to echo them.